Muslims are required to invoke Allah's blessing and peace upon the Prophet whenever his name is mentioned. The Islamic Foundation presents Love Your God, a series of stories on love and obedience for Allah and His Prophet. Our first story is Allah is with us.
The night was dark. It was already past midnight. In a few hours, the first rays of sunlight would appear. Then the Quraysh would realize that Muhammad, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had slipped through their fingers, and then the chase would be on. They would leave no part of the city unsearched. The blessed Prophet had already left his house. Ali lay asleep in the blessed Prophet's bed. The house was being surrounded by 12 young men of the Quraysh who jointly had plotted to kill the blessed Prophet that night. He knew the time to emigrate had arrived. The preparations had already been made. From his own house, the blessed Prophet came to Abu Bakr's house in Misfala, the part of Makkah which lay just to the south of Kaaba. Although they wanted to reach Medina in the north, they took the route to the south. They knew that the first place the enemy would look after realizing that Muhammad had escaped would be the way to Medina and the house of Abu Bakr. So to confuse their pursuers and gain time, they went south. Soon the Prophet and Abu Bakr came to the mountains and hills which lie south of Makkah. They began looking for a place where they could take refuge while the enemy was searching for them. After trudging up and down mountain paths, they found a cave on Mount Thor. It was desolate, isolated, and very deep. It seemed never to have been visited by human beings before. The night was still dark, except for the light from the stars. Abu Bakr entered the cave first, cleared it of pebbles and stones, and began looking for snakes which might harm the blessed Prophet. He took off a garment he was wearing, tore it into strips, and filled up every hole he could find. After making the cave safe and secure, he came out and invited the blessed Prophet to step inside. Abu Bakr loved no one more than the blessed Prophet. He had faith in him when few were prepared to believe. He spent all his money for the cause of Islam, and now he was given the honor of accompanying the blessed Prophet on that memorable journey to Medina which would change the course of human history. Earlier, as they walked from Abu Bakr's house in Misfala to the cave of Thor, Abu Bakr sometimes fell behind, and sometimes moved briskly on ahead. The blessed Prophet asked him why he didn't stay by his side. Abu Bakr replied, "I am on the lookout for any threat or danger. Sometimes I go back and see if anyone is following us, and sometimes I go ahead to see if there's any danger." "You mean," said the blessed Prophet, "you love me so much you would face danger rather than let any harm come to me?" "Yes, O Prophet," Abu Bakr replied. By the time the blessed Prophet and Abu Bakr had settled in the cave, it was dawn, and back at Makkah, the young men found out that the man who had been sleeping in the blessed Prophet's bed was not the blessed Prophet, but Ali. They became very angry and frustrated. Immediately they launched a search for the blessed Prophet. Saddling their horses, they galloped along the road to Medina, but found no tracks, so they gave up and came back. Then they spread out around the city, searching to the east, west, and south. Finally, they hired expert trackers to discover by which route the blessed Prophet had left the city. Soon, saddling up again, they headed for the mountains south of Makkah. Now they were on the right trail. The blessed Prophet and Abu Bakr were huddled in the cave. Even though they had travelled in the opposite direction to confuse the Quraysh and were in a cave which they believed would not be easily discovered by their enemies, they still did not feel secure. Abu Bakr looked around again and again and fearfully strained his ears for any sounds. Eventually they heard footsteps. Quite a few people had arrived in the area. Accompanied by the trackers, they covered the hills on foot and by horseback, trying to find where the blessed Prophet and Abu Bakr were hiding. Finally, they reached the mouth of the cave, but they found that a spider had woven a web over its entrance. Obviously, they concluded, no one could be inside. One of the trackers, Kurz bin Alqama, remarked, "The footsteps come to this point, then vanish. Where did they go from here?" "Let us go inside," said another. "Maybe they are here." Umayyah bin Khalaf, a prominent Quraysh chief, was with them. He shook his head. "There's no point in going inside the cave. What will you find there? No one has entered recently. The spider's web was woven long before Muhammad was born, I wager. Let's not waste any more time here." Another of the pursuers was standing so close to the mouth of the cave that the blessed Prophet and Abu Bakr could see his feet. Abu Bakr was extremely worried and fearful, not for his own life, but in case any harm should come to the blessed Prophet. He kept a close watch on the mouth of the cave while the blessed Prophet prayed. When the blessed Prophet had finished his prayer, Abu Bakr, with tears in his eyes, whispered, "They are directly above us now. They will see us and come inside." The blessed Prophet smiled and looked with kindness at Abu Bakr. "Why are you fearful, Abu Bakr?" He chided softly. "There are not just two of us. Allah himself is the third." Abu Bakr said, "I'm not fearful for myself, but for the harm they might do you before my eyes." The Prophet replied, "Grieve not, for God is with us." There was not the slightest sign of worry on the blessed Prophet's face, so real and intense was his faith in Allah, in his presence, in his succor. He saw with certainty that Allah was there with him, even though no material or physical help was in sight. "Indeed," said Allah in the Quran,
إِلَّا تَنصُرُوهُ فَقَدْ نَصَرَهُ اللَّهُ إِذْ أَخْرَجَهُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا ثَانِيَ اثْنَيْنِ إِذْ هُمَا فِي الْغَارِ إِذْ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ لَا تَحْزَنْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا.
Allah helped him when he was driven out by the Kafirs. He was one of the two men when both of them were in the cave, and he was saying to his companion, "Grieve not, for Allah is with us."
Our second story is, Who Will Save You?
It was during the expedition to Najd that the blessed Prophet and his men set up camp at Nakhl. It turned out that the Ghaddafans didn't dare face the blessed Prophet on open ground. Most of them disappeared into the desert and mountains, but a few remained lurking around the camp. Those few, the blessed Prophet knew, could attack at any time without warning. The blessed Prophet and his followers would have to be constantly alert. So the blessed Prophet devised a way which would protect his followers from fear and at the same time maintain a watch for possible attacks. He divided his followers into two groups. The first group was posted to keep guard over the camp. The second group joined the blessed Prophet in the prayer, and when those were finished, they moved back and took over the watch while the guards took their turn at prayer. To the Ghaddafans, in hiding around the camp, it must have been a formidable sight. Facing them were the silent guards, each at his post, while behind them Muhammad and the remainder of his men were reciting the Allahu Akbar, bowing together in unison, prostrating themselves, standing erect again, and joining the blessed Prophet as he united them in the Salam. Never before had an army been seen to perform the prayer and stand guard all at the same time and in rotation. After the prayers, the effort of the long journey from Medina to Najd began to take its toll on the followers. A few stood guard, while the remainder found rest and shelter under the shrubs and trees. The blessed Prophet, too, found a shady spot under a tree for a brief nap. Now this is just what Ghawrath of the Ghaddafan tribe had been waiting for. The day before he had been boasting to his people that Ghawrath, son of Harith, was no coward. Why are you all so afraid of Muhammad? He ranted. Kill him, and you'll have no more trouble. I'll do it myself. It's an easy thing to be rid of one man. The people gathered around, encouraging him and questioning him eagerly. That is the best way, they agreed. We'll be rid of that pest. Now tell us, how do you propose to do it? It's a matter of timing, Ghawrath replied smugly. I'll take him by surprise, he said as he walked off. The day was sweltering hot. Ghawrath approached the Muslim camp silently like a cat and peered through a clump of shrubs. To his far left stood 2 guards with their backs to him. 4 more were stretched under trees, breathing heavily. The others were scattered about at some distance. Well, what incredible luck! Close by, to his right, he recognized the blessed Prophet resting under a tree with his sword in its scabbard hanging on a branch immediately above him. Ghawrath was armed. But what a famous man he would be if he killed the blessed Prophet with his own sword. He crept noiselessly to the tree where the blessed Prophet lay resting. Carefully he raised himself, reached up, and slipped the sword from its scabbard, and with both hands brandished it above the blessed Prophet's head. At that very instant the blessed Prophet's eyes opened and gazed into Ghawrath's. Ghawrath wanted to bring the sword down, but he became completely confused by the calm look in the eyes of the blessed Prophet. Aren't you afraid of me, Muhammad? No, why should I be? Answered the blessed Prophet calmly. But I've got your sword in my hands. Aren't you afraid of me? Who will protect you now? Muhammad was completely unruffled. His face showed no fear. Allah will protect me from you, he answered quietly. Who? Exclaimed Ghawrath, not believing his ears. Allah, said the calm voice of the blessed Prophet. Ghawrath found himself unable to strike the blow. His arm lowered, and the sword fell from his hand. The blessed Prophet reached out and took it. Now, said the blessed Prophet, who will protect you from me? Ghawrath had no answer. He felt empty and lonely. After some moments, the blessed Prophet said, I trust you will make better use of the sword in the future. The companions were horrified when they heard what had happened. Some grabbed hold of Ghawrath and would have killed him, but the blessed Prophet forbade it, pardoned the man, and insisted he be released without punishment. Then he turned to Ghawrath and asked, Do you bear witness there is none to be worshipped but Allah? Ghawrath shook his head and said, If I do, the people will think it is out of fear. But this pledge I make. Never shall I fight against you, Muhammad, nor shall I support those who fight against you. Upon these words, Ghawrath was released and sent back to his people. When they pressed him to tell what had happened, he replied, I am returning from one who is the best of mankind. This expedition is called the expedition of Dhatur Riqa.
Our third story is Eager to be with God.
In the days when the Blessed Prophet was living in Medina, there were still many tribes scattered around the Arabian Peninsula who had not yet accepted that there is but one God and Muhammad is his messenger. They were angry and jealous of Muhammad and the companions and hoped that they could rid themselves of this man who had destroyed the people's belief in many different gods. As long as these tribes were constantly lying in wait to attack Muhammad and his companions, it was impossible for the Muslims of Medina to devote themselves to their mission and bring all men and women under the sovereignty of one God, nor could they settle down to their everyday work, the growing and harvesting of dates, the buying and selling of wares. How would it ever be possible under these conditions to become free from hunger and poverty? So the Blessed Prophet and his companions once again had to go on an expedition to warn the tribes of Muharrib and Ghatafan, who had been causing constant trouble for the Muslims in Medina. However, as soon as these tribal chiefs saw Muhammad and his forces marching towards them, they turned tail and fled. There was nothing else for the Blessed Prophet to do but return to Medina. As night was falling, they climbed through a narrow path in the hills. Here Muhammad stopped and pointed to a spot further down. He gave instructions to collect firewood, set up the tents, and prepare a meal. Turning to Amr bin Yasir, a Muhajir, and Abbas bin Bishr, an Ansar, he asked them if they would mount guard over the mouth of the pass in case an enemy should appear. Amr and Abbas chose a spot where they could watch over the pass and still be in sight of the camp. Abbas had brought with him his own special treasure, a small gazelle-skin parchment upon which he had copied his favourite surah. He had been trying to learn it by heart when the command had been given to leave Medina. Had he lost it? No, it was still safely tucked in his pouch. Abbas turned to his companion. "Brother, let us divide the night into 2 parts. One of us stands guard against the first part, and the other for the second. Agreed? Do you want to guard for the first or the second part of the night?" Amr was stretching himself out and arranging his cloak. "Well, I'm awfully sleepy right now, brother, and wouldn't be much good for anything. Let me sleep during the first half, and I'll keep watch during the second." "The second half is harder," commented Abbas. "No matter, I intend doing the prayer. That will keep me awake." Now, one of the enemy had been tracking down the blessed Prophet's party, and at that instant was lurking about in the shadows not far from the 2 guards. He was furious with the Muslims. His wife had tried to bring harm to them, and as a result had been killed in the skirmish that followed. He had sworn that he would take vengeance by killing one of Muhammad's companions. As he approached, Abbas was just standing up to pray. He began reading his favourite surah by the dim light of the campfire below, and as he read, the prayer rose to Allah, and he became overwhelmed by the beauty of the verses and filled with a feeling of faith and worship so strong that in the moments that followed, he hardly realized what was happening.
رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان.
He is the Lord of the 2 easts and Lord of the 2 wests. Then which of the favours of your Lord will ye deny? The enemy's eyes lit up. What a perfect target he makes. He chuckled, and carefully fitting an arrow to his bow, he took aim and shot. The arrow struck Abbas in the side. He pulled it out, tossed it beside him, and continued reading.
يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان.
Of him seeks its need, every creature in the heavens and on earth. Every day in new splendour doth he shine. Then which of the favours of your Lord will you deny? The Ghatafani cursed, took aim and shot again. The arrow struck Abbas in the leg. He reached down, pulled it out, and continued,
هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان.
Is there any reward for good other than good? Then which of the favours of your Lord will ye deny? When the 3rd arrow struck and blood began flowing from Abbas's wounds, he concluded the prayer,
تبارك اسم ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام.
Blessed be the name of thy Lord, full of majesty, bounty, and honour. Abbas bowed, prostrated himself, said salam, and finished his prayer. Only then did he wake up his companion. The Ghatafani, thinking that the guard had finally been fatally wounded, jumped up to take a look. 2 of them, and both alive? He swore at his failure, and knowing he might get caught, ran off. Amr rubbed his eyes and stared at his companion. Good heavens, why didn't you wake me the first time you were hit? He felt terrible that he had slept through the whole occurrence and hastily made bandages for Abbas's wounds. Abbas smiled and reassured him. It's all right, Amr, really. I was in such a state of joy and worship that actually I hardly felt the arrows. I just kept plucking them out and going on with the surah. Well, by the third arrow, I had finished the surah and then the prayer, and I thought I'd better wake you up. I could have continued even, but what if I had been killed? A dead guard is of no use to anyone, and he's a danger to the camp. I couldn't have let the blessed Prophet down, you know. Anwar laughed and embraced his friend.
Our fourth story is Allah and His Messenger are enough.
The Byzantine imperial army is preparing for war. The news spread quickly throughout Medina and the nearby oasis. The Byzantines were planning to wipe out the Muslims with their mighty army. But the blessed Prophet knew that with the help of Allah, the Muslims could show that they were strong enough to hold their own. In order to stop the Byzantines, he called upon Muslims to come forward for jihad. Banded together, committed to Allah, and striving in His cause, they would be stronger than ever before. Enormous amounts of equipment, swords and armor, provisions of all kinds would be needed, and great quantities of water, since it was now summer and they had to cross waterless deserts in order to round up their army. Who would follow the blessed Prophet's call? Who would go forth in the heat of summer just when the crops should be harvested? Who would leave behind their families and the comfort of their homes in order to face a daunting enemy? And most important of all, who would be willing to donate their wealth, their provisions and personal belongings to provide for such a defense? Some who were not sincere Muslims would hold back, but the true believers in Allah and His Messenger were eager to do all they could. Umar was one of these. Here was the chance he had been waiting for, to be true to his God and to himself, and to prove to the blessed Prophet his sincerity, faith, and devotion. Returning home in haste, he ordered his family to collect all their belongings. Now listen, each one of you will keep half of what you own, and the other half you will give to me, so I may give it to the Prophet for the cause of jihad. Umar set the example by bringing forth his armor and all his wealth, which he divided into 2 piles. His wife counted out the jewelry and trinkets, which she had carefully saved from the time of the emigration to Medina. Into Umar's hands she dropped 1 pair of golden earrings. "Did you not hear?" protested Umar. "I said half. Give me 1 earring. "But my dear husband," laughed his wife, "if I give you 1 earring, nobody will buy it, and if I keep the other, it will be worthless to me. Therefore I give you both." Umar was delighted with the amount of goods he was able to give from his household. His arms were laden with every kind of valuable, and his children trotted along behind, carrying the rest. On the way to the blessed Prophet's house, he spied Abu Bakr, headed in the same direction. Abu Bakr didn't seem to be carrying much, as far as Umar could see. "Praise Allah, for once I shall be better than Abu Bakr. For once I'll surpass him in doing the will of Allah and obeying Allah's messenger." Umar was feeling very elated and very happy with himself as he entered the blessed Prophet's house. "This is my humble offering in response to your appeal," said Umar, as he staggered forward with his load. "You are free to use it in any way for the sake of Allah." "And what have you left behind for yourself and your family?" asked the blessed Prophet, who was both pleased and concerned. He was pleased that Umar had brought so much, but he was concerned that Umar's family might be left with too little. "Oh, they have plenty, they have enough. Please don't worry," said Umar. "But how much?" persisted the blessed Prophet. "As much as I have brought you," confessed Umar. "I divided everything up, half to us and half to the cause of Allah." The blessed Prophet smiled and nodded with approval. Now up stepped Abu Bakr. He placed the small amount he had brought before the blessed Prophet, who asked him the same question he'd asked Umar. "What have you left behind for your family?" Abu Bakr looked away. He really did not want to say that he had left nothing behind. At the same time, he could not hide anything from Allah's messenger. "They will be well taken care of," he answered. "I have left behind for them Allah and His messenger, As for belongings and such things, I have brought you what I have." The blessed Prophet smiled warmly and affectionately at his friend Abu Bakr. Once again, Abu Bakr had shown his spirit of self-sacrifice and trust in Allah and the blessed Prophet. From the very first years he had followed the blessed Prophet, he had given all he owned, and he had accompanied the blessed Prophet on the hijrah to Medina. Umar returned home feeling ashamed and not very pleased with himself. "Once again, Abu Bakr has proved to be a better man than I am," he confessed. "There is no limit to his devotion and obedience to Allah and the Prophet."
Our fifth story is Abu Talha and the Beautiful Bird.
In the days of the blessed Prophet Muhammad, there lived a man called Abu Talha. Abu Talha thought himself to be the luckiest man in all Medina, and everyone agreed with him, because he owned a very beautiful garden. What made his garden more precious than anyone else's was a spring of cool, clear water, which kept everything green and beautiful. Nothing was more pleasant, more satisfying to Abu Talha than to do the afternoon prayer in his beautiful garden, with the date palms swaying in the breeze and the gurgle of the nearby spring. For this reason, he very much liked to pray in the garden, and never failed to praise Allah for all the good which he had bestowed upon him. Now, one sleepy afternoon, Abu Talha tucked his prayer mat under his arm, and as usual made his way to the garden. Humbly he stood, raised his hands, and said, "Allahu Akbar." He was just beginning to recite the Quran when another sound, beside the familiar swoosh of the palm trees and the gurgle of the stream, met his ear. A long, high tweet resounded above his head, followed by such a happy-sounding chirp that Abu Talha's eyes popped open in spite of himself. There, perched on the date palm, was the most beautiful bird in the whole wide world. Its wings were as green as emeralds, its tail feathers as red as pomegranate seeds, and it had a little golden head with a black beak that sang its beautiful song to its heart's content. Abu Talha was fascinated. He stared and stared until he suddenly remembered where he was and what he was supposed to be doing. Ashamed of himself, he dutifully went back to the prayer, starting hopefully where he had left off. When he had finished, the bird had flown. Now, this little bird considered itself to be as lucky as Abu Talha. Here was a gorgeous garden with sweet seeds to peck at and a bubbly stream. What better place to build a nest and settle down for the rest of its life? The next day, Abu Talha appeared again at his favourite spot in the garden under the shade of the palm tree and began the prayer. But he failed to notice that the beautiful bird was building a nest on top of the tree. Soon the bird began to sing and whistle so beautifully that Abu Talha lost track of what he was doing. He feasted his eye on the feathered beauty who was hopping from branch to branch, chirping a friendly song. But what am I doing? He asked himself suddenly. Which rak'ah am I on? Number 2? Number 3? Abu Talha heaved a deep sigh, somehow finished the prayer, rolled up his prayer mat, and left the garden. How could the prayer reach Allah if he himself could not remember where he had left off? How could he remember Allah when his heart was full of beautiful gardens, bubbling streams, and bird songs? It was hopeless to try. Abu Talha was an honest man. He knew how important it was for a good Muslim to perform the prayer, paying attention to none but Allah. That very night, he went to visit the blessed Prophet Muhammad. He told the blessed Prophet all about his garden, the date palms, the gurgling stream, and the beautiful bird. "Oh, Prophet," he said, "I cannot let these things stand in the way of my worship to Allah. So it is better not to have them at all. Please take my garden with all that is in it. I give it to you to use for all the Muslims of Medina." The blessed Prophet Muhammad graciously accepted this gift. Abu Talha was never again distracted from the prayer, and from that time on, hopefully, all his prayers were accepted by Allah.
Our last story is The Wise Disciple.
A 1,000 years ago, Baghdad was a city of grandeur, of riches and luxury. It was the capital of the largest empire in the world, the Abbasid Empire, where Harun al-Rashid ruled in all his splendor. From every corner of the earth, trade caravans brought silks and jewels and perfumes to adorn and beautify its inhabitants. Apart from all these worldly riches, Baghdad was also famous as a great center of learning. Scholars of all kinds, mathematicians, astronomers and philosophers came to live there. Amongst these, there came a man called Junaid, who was not only a renowned teacher and a leader of men, but a godly man with a very high moral character. Junaid was born in the Persian town of Nehavand. His father was a glass merchant, but he'd been brought up in the noblest of traditions by his uncle Sari al-Saqati. When Junaid was only 11 years old, he was taken by Sari on pilgrimage. There, in the Masjid al-Haram, they met with 400 scholars who were all discussing the definition of thankfulness. Junaid and his uncle sat and listened intently. Each scholar felt that his answer was the perfect one, much truer than that of the person who had just spoken. Old Sari knew that his nephew was very wise for someone so young. He was curious to hear what his nephew would say on the subject. He cleared his throat to gain attention. Admittedly, brothers, your arguments are all worthy of consideration and praise. But I wonder if you would be so good as to listen a moment to my nephew here, who, in spite of his tender age, often surprises me by his remarks. What do you say, Junaid? What is true thankfulness? The other scholars, surprised and a bit amused by the doting uncle, turned towards the serious-faced youth and encouraged him to speak. Junaid was not intimidated. He raised his high, clear voice and said, "Thankfulness means that we should not misuse a favor which God has bestowed upon us, nor should we use that favor as a source of disobedience." All the scholars were surprised at such a profound answer. Old Sari himself smiled and said, "Why, it seems, Junaid, that your special gift from God will be your tongue." Later, when Junaid was a grown man living in Baghdad, he acquired many disciples and pupils who came to learn from him because of his piety, his understanding, and his sincerity. Some came only to hear his lectures, but others, who were really devoted to him, lived with him all the time. Junaid showed affection and love to everyone and taught them all on equal terms, but there was one disciple whom he seemed to prefer above all others. No one could quite understand why, and as a result they all became quite jealous. Finally, they decided to ask Junaid point blank why he preferred this particular disciple. "He's just like all the rest of us, as far as we can see," they complained. "There isn't anything special about him, so why do you treat him as if there were?" Junaid tried to explain. "He's wiser and more disciplined than you are. He is well-mannered, devoted to Allah, and his understanding is quite profound. One day you will find this out for yourselves." No one was very satisfied with this reply. They really couldn't see what Junaid was talking about, but since they respected their teacher, they just kept silent about it. Junaid, meanwhile, realized they had not understood, and decided to show them the truth. The very next day he called them over and told them all to go to the bird market and bring back 20 birds. When they had brought back the birds, he gave them the following instructions. "I want you each to go to a place where no one can see you. Take a knife, kill a bird, then bring it back to me. Only be absolutely sure that no one sees you do it." Each disciple took a bird and left, and before long was back again. One by one they showed Junaid their dead birds, but from the back of the room came a sound of chirping and a fluttering of wings. There stood the favourite disciple holding a very live bird. He was looking a little concerned and surprised, which made everyone laugh all the louder at him. The wise disciple indeed. "What's the matter, brother?" chided one of them. "Don't you know how to obey your teacher's instructions? What a fool!" guffawed another. Junaid called him forward in a stern voice. "Well," he asked, "why didn't you kill the bird as I instructed?" "You said to kill the bird in a place where no one could see," apologized the disciple. "But since Allah sees everything that I do, that was impossible. How can I hide anything from him? That's why I couldn't kill the bird." Junaid nodded his head and turned to the others. "There, you see? You see how wise he is? Compare his measure of understanding with yours, and you'll see why I prefer him." The disciples shuffled their feet and hung their heads. In humble voices they apologized to their master and inwardly asked Allah for forgiveness.